Hello and welcome to another crisp webinar. We had some technical issues when we filmed this live and I managed to cut off about the first 30 seconds of the presentation, so I just wanted to quickly do an introduction to this video. The topic for discussion is a quick guide to malting and specialty malts, and it's presented by Hannah Beer and Carl Heron from Crisp Malt. Just by way of an introduction to what the webinar is about, it's really a discussion of the malting process. And what Hannah covered in the presentation, which when it was live, and the bit that we've cut off, is what is malting. And it's the partial germination of cereals. Any of those cereals could be any of the grasses, be they barley, wheat, rye, oats, sorghum, these sorts of things. Of course, in the malting world, it does tend to mostly be barley. And it's the partial germination of those cereals under controlled conditions of moisture, temperature, and time, which is then producing a raw material that can be further processed and used in the brewing, distilling, and food industries. This is really where I hand over to Hannah, who's going to take it up and explain the rest of the malting process before Carl then delves into the uses of those malts in the brewing process and what flavours and benefits you can derive from them. I'll see you on the other end of this for the questions. Thank you.
So here we have the typical timescale of malting. So malting is a batch process, so the whole content is transferred between the stages. So the first staging is steeping, and this takes around 2 days, and this is where we're increasing the moisture content of the grain. The steeped grain then progresses to the germination stage. Be between 4 and 6 days. So this can be dependent on the type of barley that we're malting, the type of malt that we're wanting to achieve, but it also can depend on the plant itself. So for example, our modern germination vessels will tend to be around 4 days, whereas the traditional floor maltings, which we still have at Ryborough, that can take up to 6 days germination. And then finally, the malt spends 1 or 2 days in the kiln. So let's have a look at the first stage, steeping. And what does steeping aim to achieve? Well, during steeping, the grain is hydrated to a moisture content of around the mid-40s, and this is achieved by submerging the grain underwater. And what this does is it essentially tricks the barley into thinking that it's in the ground, ready to grow into a new plant, and it initiates a uniform germination. So if we take a look at some of the steeping cycles, we can see there are 2 types. The continuous steeping cycle was popular with maltsters around 100 years or so ago, and this is where the grain would have been submerged underwater for the entire 48-hour period. However, it was found that broken steeping actually achieves the same moisture content, but at the end of the steeping, the grain is in a much better physical condition. So broken steeping works where we submerge the grain underwater for a period of time. Then we drain the vessel and we allow the grain to stand, and this is known as an air rest. The vessel is then subsequently refilled and drained, and this can be done up to 3 times. So here you can see some examples of some steeping vessels. So on the left we have a conical steep, and this can hold up to 60 tonne of barley, and these are typically made of stainless steel. So barley is loaded into the vessel via a conveyor system at the top, and then what we have at the bottom is a very complex valve system that allows for both water to be introduced, drained, CO2 can be removed, and then at the end of steeping, the grain can be discharged into another conveying system and sent to the germination vessel. On the right, we have a flat bottom steep, and this can hold up to several hundred tonnes of barley. Similarly, the water is loaded from the bottom of the vessel. However, we have a mechanical system in the middle which loads and unloads the grain, and I can show you that in a bit more detail in the following photos. So here we have an empty flat bottom steep vessel. And here we have a steeping vessel being loaded. So this mechanical arm system, known as the girocleur, this spins one way to load, which distributes grain evenly across the floor, and then it will spin the other way to unload, working in the reverse action. So the grain depth bed in a flat bottom steep is approximately 2 meters. Once the steeping cycle has been complete, the grain starts to germinate, and this is where it then progresses to the germination stage and the germination vessel. So germination. Germination is the heart of the process. It's really where all the action happens, and we are experiencing that change from barley to malt. And germination is the natural modification of the barley structure. So the cell walls are broken down, which increases the friability of the grain and releases the starch. Proteins are solubilized into TSN and FAN, and we have the synthesis and release of enzymes, creating RDP and DU. So during germination, the grain is allowed to grow. So we have the formation of the rootlets, and we also begin to form the shoot. And as you can see in this image, there is activity within the endosperm. So all these things above are happening in this endosperm, resulting in a modified endosperm. So germination is achieved by the careful control of humidified airflows to control the temperature of the grain and to create the optimal conditions for the grain to grow. So here we have a diagram of a modern circular germination vessel. And as you can see, the grain bed sits on a perforated floor, and this allows air to be passed through the grain. And what this does is it provides the grain with oxygen to respire, while it also removes any excess carbon dioxide. The rotating arm has turners within the grain that keeps the bed loose, and it prevents the rootlets from matting. So what this does is it encourages a homogeneous bed, and it allows for even airflow through the grain. So here you can see an empty germination vessel. We have the perforated floor here, the stainless steel structure, and you can also see the turners. Here we have a vessel being loaded. And finally, this is a filled germination vessel. So here you can see the patterns in the grain made by the turner. And this vessel will contain over 200 tons of grain. And the grain depth will be around 1.8 meters. So the end result of germination is modification. So this is the degradation of cell walls, the solubilization of some of the storage proteins, and the synthesis and release of enzymes. So as a summary, germination supplies the brewers and distillers with the accessible starch and enzymes to degrade into the fermentable sugars. Not only this, but it also provides other benefits such as nutrients for yeast. Now, the grain at the end of germination is known as green malt, and this comes important when we touch on specialty malts a little bit later on. But at the end of germination, what we want to do is we want to fix the quality. So we do this by drying the grain in the kilning stage. So what kilning does is it gently halts the process. It gently halts the germination process with careful application of airflows and temperature. So this stops the grain from continuing to grow. Kilning also reduces the moisture content down to the levels that you'll see on your certificates of analysis. And it's also the stage which promotes the development of colour and flavour characteristics. And this is achieved by passing heated air through the grain. It's also worth noting that the temperature profiles within the kilning stage are synonymous with the different malt types. And again, this will be touched on a little bit later on when we talk about some of the specialty malts. So here we have a circular kilning vessel, and as you can see again, the grain is sitting on a perforated floor, and we have heated air passing through the grain bed. In modern kilns such as this one, there's a rather sophisticated system for air movement and energy recovery, and hot air can be recirculated through a heat exchange system. This is a picture of a kiln being emptied. And what we're trying to achieve here is we're trying to achieve a very level grain bed, and this allows for even airflow and even treatment of the grains. And in kilning vessels, the grain bed depth is even less at this stage at around 1.6 meters, and this is to encourage a homogeneous final product. So there are 3 stages within a kilning profile. The first of which is the free drying. Now this is where the surface moisture of the grain is removed, and what we're doing is we are essentially removing the moisture that we put into the grain during the steeping. This is controlled by passing large volumes of air through the grain with only moderate application of heat. Following this, the grain is force dried, and this is where the temperatures are increased and the majority of the bound moisture is drawn off. Finally, the malt's cured, and this is where the temperatures are raised even more, and we start to get the colour and flavour compounds being formed through the Maillard reactions. This stage also reduces the levels of DMS. I'll now pass you over to Carl, who will talk about some of the malts that are made in this way.
Thanks, Hannah. Yeah, so we've just really covered there the parts of the malting process that create base malts, and those are only produced from approved barley varieties. So breeders are constantly coming up with new varieties, and those go through quite a rigorous testing process to make sure that they're suitable for malting, and they actually split them into brewing varieties and distilling varieties as well. So they do have slightly different properties. There are 2- and 6-row varieties of barley. Here in the UK, we only grow superior 2-row barley for malting. The 6-row, I don't think we sell any here in the UK. On the continent in the US, 6-row is generally grown for feed purposes, so it's fed to animals because it's quite high in protein and energy. There are 2 different times that you can sow barley. One's in the autumn, and that's September, October time. We call those winter barleys. And then we can also start planting sort of right at the back end of February and into March and April. And those are called spring varieties. What we found is that winters tend to have a tougher husk, that are a bit more durable, and they tend to be well suited to specialty malt production than the spring varieties. So you can see on the diagram there, a little bit of a pictorial depiction of the progress of the barley plants, a winter compared to a spring. And if you look along to sort of July and August, they are pretty much caught up. So despite the fact that the spring barleys go in probably 5 months later than the winters, they do actually catch up. And generally there's about 2 or 3 weeks difference between when they're harvested. And that really helps the farmers in terms of spreading out the load on the combines and getting the harvest in. One thing that tends to happen is that winter barleys go to make ale malts and spring barleys tend to go for lager malts. Thanks, Hannah. So let's have a look at some specs, like some real malts now. So let's talk about ale malts to begin with. In the UK, we tend to grow those between 1.4 and 1.65% total nitrogen. And they tend to be quite well modified. And we can tell that by the soluble nitrogen ratio, which should be between 38 and 43%. The colour on these will be about 5 to 7 EBC. So in that curing phase that Hannah's just talked about, we do apply quite a bit of heat for a reasonable period of time to develop that colour and get some flavour in there too. But we want to be quite gentle because we don't want to destroy the enzymes that are going to be needed in the mash tun. So we're quite careful in making sure that in that middle phase, when we're taking off that bound moisture, we don't go too high a temperature then, because what would happen there is we cook those enzymes and denature them, and then they wouldn't be available for converting starch into sugar in the mash tun. Extra pale malts are slightly different in the fact that they're lower colour, and that is because they're not kilned quite so hard, so that will be a slightly lower temperature, and the colour range is 2.5 to 3.5 EBC. And because we've not kilned it quite so hard, the diastatic power, these enzymes that we're talking about, will be slightly higher. And one note of caution I would say when you're brewing with extra pale is that it will tend to give a more fermentable wort for the same mash temperature and thickness. So if you want a beer not to ferment too far, then increase your mashing temperature a little bit, and that'll make it finish at the level that you want it to finish at and produce an amount of alcohol. Last one we'll talk about, and you can see there on the picture, it's a bit paler still on this particular picture, is lager and pilsner malts. So those have a similar kind of kilning profile in actual fact, but they are higher in nitrogen. So this is the predominant style of malt in the world. Probably about 80% of the malt produced would be a lager pilsner kind of style. Tends to be higher in total nitrogen and spring, like we said, a spring variety. And it's not quite so well modified. And that's generally because we want it to give more body and flavour in the beer, and we need to keep that colour nice and low. And again, the diastatic power is quite similar, around about 60 degrees. Thanks for that. So many brewers, including myself when I was brewing, thought that base malt was base malt. It isn't. There are differences for sure. The ale malts tend to be a little bit deeper in flavour. Those Maillard reactions that Hannah talked about do create quite a bit of flavour, and that malty aroma that you get would be deeper on an ale malt than it would on extra pales, for example. So generally those should be used for like mild bitters, pale ales, stouts and porters, because they do have that malty backbone, and they'll give that to the beer and balance out some of the hot flavours. What we've found is that the traditional varieties, the older varieties like Maris Otter, which is 1965, and Chevalier, a malt that we brought back from the seed bank that was discovered in 1824. It was actually the first ever malting barley. Tend to be even more complex. They've got a lot more depth to them, and a lot more. The Maris Otter tends to be quite biscuity, whereas the Chevalier's got a kind of an apricot aroma to it. It's really, really interesting. So I think these would be really well suited to IPAs, to bigger bitters, or 5% ABV best bitters, and your imperial stouts and porters, and of course barley wines. You get that real depth of flavour and complexity, and layer up all these different flavours of malt backbone in those type of beers. So that's a good usage for those. The extra pales tend to be a little sweeter. They suit lighter coloured styles, obviously. So you tend to use those in the blondes, New England IPAs, some pale ales, and the golden beers as well, where it gives you a bit of an option to add maybe a little bit of speciality. We'll talk about that later. Another malt that's available from Crisp is the Clear Choice malt. That was developed so that it didn't have any polyphenol precursors in it, and these polyphenol precursors are called proanthocyanidins. Do have a kind of slight astringency and harshness. So without those in the husk of the grain, because those have been bred out, you do tend to get a slightly sweeter flavour. And that sweetness does let the hop shine a little bit. So if you're doing really hot forward pales, the New England IPAs, the double IPAs, then that would really suit that style. And it does make a difference in terms of flavour balance. You've not got it fighting with the malty backbone. Okay, Hannah. So pass back to Hannah, and we'll now talk about speciality malts.
Thank you, Carl. Okay, so there are 3 categories of specialty malts, each of which are produced in slightly different ways. So the first of which are produced on a conventional kiln. So this is the exact same process that we've already run through. However, what we are doing is we're achieving the maximum possible temperatures and the maximum colours we can in this conventional kiln. So these will be our Viennas and our Munichs. The second specialty malt types are the roasted malts. So these range from our amber all the way through to our black malts. And these are achieved by taking kilned malt. So this is the malt that's already passed through the previous process, and this goes into a roasting facility. The final malt type are the crystals and caramel malts. Now these are produced from the green malt I mentioned before. So this is the malt that has been germinated but hasn't been passed through the kiln. And then this green malt is fed directly into a roasting facility. So let's take a quick look at the drum roasting process. Now this isn't too dissimilar from a coffee roaster, and it's a batch process. So what we'll do is we'll take our batch of raw material, whether this be the kilned malt or the green malt. We'll place it into the drum. The drum will then rotate, and this can be heated either externally or internally by passing hot air directly into the drum. So let's have a look at how each of the malt types are made. So as we said, for roasted malts, we're taking kilned malt, and this is placed into the drum. Progressively heated depending on the desired product. So the temperature and the time within the drum will dictate the product that's being produced. So for example, if we take a look at amber, this will be treated at around 140 degrees C, whereas black malt production can reach up to 225 degrees C and can be roasted for up to 2 hours. Colour is achieved, the product's then quickly cooled by quenching to stop any further colour or flavour development. Roast barley is made in a similar way, but we're just replacing the raw material with raw barley. Roast barley is a careful art as the temperatures are approaching that of combustion temperature. So it's not uncommon and it's not unheard of that drums go up in flames while making these darker products. let's have a look at the crystals and caramel malts. Now these are made in a slightly different manner. So we have our green malt. So again, this is from germination without being kilned. This is fed into the drum, and then the drum is sealed. And the first stage that it goes through is stewing. So this is where the drum is heated externally without drying, and the moisture is contained within the drum. And during this stewing phase, what happens is the endosperm begins to liquefy. The endosperm is fully converted, and we have the nice soft center. Air is then forced through the drum to encourage the grain to dry, and the temperatures are increased, where the endosperm begins to harden, and we're creating that glassy crystalline structure that you're familiar with. Again, the temperatures and time determine the product that are being made. So I'd like to take this opportunity as well to talk you through Crisp's new roasting facility. So this is our specialty malt plant, our SMP. What this is a brand new technology. Looks very different to the drum roasting process. However, in principle, it works in a relatively similar way. However, this is a continuous system, so it differs from the batch process that we see in the drum roaster. And the grain is roasted by direct contact with an electrically heated surface. So again, this is another difference, as we're controlling the temperature by electricity here, whereas in the drum process, we are fueling it by either an oil or gas. So what the system is it's 2 towers of spiraling tubes. Raw material is introduced at the bottom of the first tower into these tubes, and then we have off-balance motors which generate vibrations and cause the grain to transport upwards through the system. Material then passes through to the bottom of the second tower and travels up the system in the same way. What we also have is we have the facility to introduce hot air into the system through a central column. And what this does is it allows for a really confined heat treatment atmosphere. The system's fully automated, and what we have is we have 5 independent heating zones. And what this allows for is really fine levels of control. So we can control each of these independent heating zones to within 1 degree Celsius. So let's take a look at our roasted products. So kilned malt, similar to the drum roasting process. So been through the process we've seen before. This is fed into the tower at a rate of up to 1.5 tons an hour. The temperature is then gradually increased through each independent heating zone. And then similar to the drum roasting process, the final colours are determined by how high the temperature of the system reach. Once the material exits the system, and it's then immediately quenched and cooled. And again, roast barley is made in a similar way. We're just replacing the inlet feed material for barley. So crystal and caramel malts, as we said, this uses the green malt, but this is fed into the tower at a lower flow rate of about 1 ton an hour. It travels exactly the same way through the system, but the configuration of the tower slightly differs. So as we saw in the drum roasting process, the phase. So this is again what we're achieving in the SMP. So the first column is used as a stewing column. Green malt, and it's heated by the direct contact with the electrically heated tubes, and there is no drying in this phase. So we have no hot air being introduced into the system, and the moisture is contained within the tower and converting the endosperm. Towers will really start to roast. So this is where we're increasing the temperatures. Hot air is being introduced to draw off the moisture, encourage drying, and we are hardening the liquefied endosperm. So just quickly comparing the two systems, as I've mentioned, on one hand we have a batch process with the drum roaster, and then on the other hand we have a continuous process for the SMP. This can have a knock-on effect on product changeover. So for example, in drum roasters, the system has to be emptied, cleaned and refilled. However, due to the continuous nature of the SMP, one product can be ran immediately after another with just a simple change to the recipe. Another major difference is the heat source, as I've already touched upon. So on the drum roasting process, we've got direct heating by natural gas or oil, and then on the other hand, the SMP, we've got indirect heating solely via electricity. The colour analysis also differs between the two systems. So the drum roaster, this takes quite a fast-acting operator who's continuously taking samples until the desired colour is achieved. And once this is achieved, he must quickly act to immediately stop the process to prevent any further colour development. However, what the SMP does is this has a predefined recipe to achieve certain product types. And what we also have is a very rapid colour analysis method, which enables quick decisions to be made, and within only a very small quantity of malt, any adjustments can be made. What this does is it also influences the consistency of the batches. So the SMP therefore has very high levels of consistency, not only through one production run, but between the production runs themselves. And this again is also due to the really fine levels of control we have with temperature. It can be a little bit inconsistent on the occasion and may require the blending of batches to achieve specification. This also means that the drum roaster can be quite labour intensive, in comparison to the SMP, where we've got rapid analysis methods and a fully automated system. Finally, the treatment of the grain again slightly differs between the two. The SMP is far gentler on the grain and we tend to avoid any damage. I'll finally pass you back to Carl to run you through some of these specialty malts in a little more detail.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I guess the next stage on from an ale malt will be to leave that on the regular kiln as part of the normal malting process and just develop a bit more flavour. So that is really increasing the temperature slightly, but leaving it there for a little longer. And what we can produce from that is Vienna and Munich malts. The Vienna malt is 9 to 15 EBC, Munich anything from 20 up to 60, so you can get a low and a high colour Munich malt. They just tend to give a richer depth of malt, nice malty flavours, that lovely malty Horlicks type sweetness, which can really suit some styles. And you go from a kind of light golden right through to red orange, from a Vienna right into a Munich. And you'll be adding these, if you're adding them for flavour, probably 5 to 15%, something like that of the grist. But one thing you can do with a Vienna, because it's got sufficient diastatic power, there's enough enzyme there, you can actually use it 100%. So you might have heard of Vienna lagers, for example, or you may see some older recipes that talk about mild ale malt. Mild ale malt is actually the same as Vienna, and that can be used in various ways to get some nice deep flavours into some of these different beers. Okay, Hannah, thanks. We need to take a step up now. We're talking about some proper flavour development and I guess less addition of these types of colours. So these are the roasted malts that Hannah talked about. So these are taken off the regular kiln and then they're taken to the drum or to the SMP, and we there add more flavour and colour through heating. The lightest one is called amber malt, between 50 and 100 EBC. This would be probably used in bitters, maybe in milds to give a little bit of depth of flavour. Brown malt actually suits itself, surprisingly not, to brown ales. American brown ales, British brown ales, really just give quite a nice toasty biscuit flavour. So I think of amber as kind of lightly done toast and brown as well done toast. And you do get that bready biscuity thing coming through, and it is really quite pleasant. So anything between, again, 5 and 15%, depending on what kind of colour you want to achieve. And you can layer it up with other specialities as well, particularly crystal and Cara malts, which I'll talk about in a moment. We can go beyond that. We can start leaving it in there for a little longer. I'm guessing, Hannah, this will be in the second column where you get the chocolate and blacks, yeah? And what's going to happen there is you're going to get more intensity of flavour. Again, we need to be quite careful about the temperatures, that we don't set the thing on fire. It did cost us a lot of money, so we don't want to spoil it. The initial kind of flavour is and colour is the chocolate malt. A chocolate malt called chocolate malt because of the colour, not because of the taste. If you want chocolate flavour in your beers, you need to use cacao nibs or something like that and roast those a little bit. Black malt's the next one. I think where you get in there, where chocolate malt is kind of roasted coffee type aromas, black malt starts to get a little bit more astringent, slightly harsher. It's got a bit of a bite to it. And then if you get to roasted barley, then that's going to give you a proper kind of ashy astringency. And all these things can suit different styles. So I would think all three of them, well, I would say certainly chocolate and black you could put into stouts and porters. If you were going to go for a true kind of Irish stout type of style, then I'd probably go fair bit of roasted barley, 10 or 12% roasted barley, just to get that bite, that bitter bite, the stringency that you would be looking for from that. Okay, thanks, Hannah. So let's move on to the stewed malts. Cara malt is created in a slightly different way to crystal, in the fact that it's not left to germinate for quite as long. So what happens is you've got longer chain sugars there, and those longer chain sugars are kind of fixed when you make Cara malt, because you're heating it up, reducing the moisture. So when you put that into your mash tun, it's going to give you flavour, but it's also going to give you body. So a Cara Gold, which is a low coloured Cara, round about the sort of 12 to 15 mark, would add that body, but not have a big impact on colour. You can also use a dextrin malt. Some maltsters call this type of malt dextrin malt. And that also has these longer chain sugars. And then conventional Cara, you would actually start to get some flavour benefits from that. There would be a slight caramel sweetness. But that, I would say, between sort of 5 and 8% would be there to give body and depth, and then a little bit of flavour. It's a really useful malt to use if you want to get some structure to your beer in terms of mouthfeel. The crystals are stewed in the same way. They've been germinated for a regular period of time, so there's lots of opportunity in that endosperm for us to basically liquefy the sugar. The temperatures that we're using in that liquefaction step, in that stewing stage that Hannah talked about, is kind of 65 degrees C, which is your typical mashing temperature. So we're mashing the sugar inside the grain, if you like, and that's how you get that lovely sweetness. And then what we do is we put that into the second column, or we open the drum roaster up to the air, and we start to crystallize that sugar. And the longer we leave it in there, and the higher the temperature, the more colour we get, and the flavour starts to develop. So a crystal that's around about 100, 120, 150 would be a kind of quite a sweet caramel flavour. And I think anything above 6% inclusion in your grist, you might start to get a bit of a long, sweet linger on the beer, on the finish. So if you're wanting the colour development from crystal, it might be better to split that colour between an amber and a crystal, or an amber and a brown, just so that you don't get too much lingering sweetness and that cloying finish. Once you get up to the medium sort of crystals, sort of 240 thereabouts, then you're going to get more of a kind of treacle toffee flavour, if ever you've tasted that. Really nice. That you'd be kind of looking for those flavours in milds, maybe, certainly in porters, maybe in a best bitter. And then the next stage on from that, once you're up at 400, 450, it transforms completely and goes into kind of raisin sultana type flavors, which could be fabulous in like deep ruby beers. And that's the kind of colour you get from a 400 crystal. And that tends not to be quite so cloying and sweet. So that's a quick run through how to use these. And we do have recipes on the website that showcase all of these different types of malt, should you want to have a look. So I think that's us, Hannah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. That was absolutely superb. The questions have been piling in. So we're also going to ask our technical director, David Griggs, to join us, because there's some on there that I think might be Griggsy questions. So if he's there in the ether.
I'm here.
He is.
I'm here. Yeah, do you want to see me as well?
Oh, go on then.
Shall we? Go on then. Oh, hang on. There we are. No, yes, no. Try again.
I'll kick off with the first question while you figure out the IT there, Dave.
Oh, technical.
Excellent.
Too technical. Hello, everybody.
The first question comes from one of the malting fraternity over in Canada. Can you elaborate why continuous steeping achieves less uniformity, and why exactly broken steeping allows for homogeneity?
Is that a question for me?
Yes.
Like it
you said you were going to answer it. So
I did. Okay, so if you imagine continuous steeping, we're keeping the grain immersed for the full duration of the steeping process. I mean, back in the day, the guys may have drained the water, but really immediately replaced it. They wouldn't have allowed the grain really to have stood in air for any period of time. So you can imagine the grain's been underwater for essentially for 48 hours. It's really got quite anaerobic, and at the end of that period, the grain looks half dead. Well, it looks fully dead, really. So it takes a few days for it to recover from that continuous immersion, and different grains would have recovered at different rates. So some grains would have been starting to germinate sooner than others under that process. Once we get into broken steeping, the periods under air allow the grains to start to germinate during those earlier stages, certainly during the second air rest. And as a consequence of that, when you come out of steep with the broken steeping, then the grains are much more ready to germinate. In fact, they are already germinating, so you reduce your length of germination phase. And ideally, we would see over 95% of the grains being chitted and germinating at that stage. Honestly.
Good.
Very good. Okay. One on fermentable sugars and in crystal malts, Carl. When creating a recipe, should you consider that crystal and toasted malts add fermentable sugar? Are they adding fermentable sugar to the wort?
I would say probably roasted malts, probably not. And the sugars coming from crystals, yeah, there would be a bit of a contribution there, but it is fixed. You're not going to convert it in the tun. It will just be soluble sugar. So once you put that in the mash tun, it will dissolve and contribute to extract and to flavour.
But is it contributing to fermentable sugars, or are these really sort of locked up dextrins?
I would probably say they're not fermentable.
Not fermentable, yeah. So they will actually add sweetness then, and therefore, yeah. Good stuff. Okay. Now, this is a bit of malting history, so let's see if anyone on the panel can answer it. Am I right in thinking crystal malt is a fairly recent process? How far does it go back?
Well, I go back 30 years, and they were doing it 30 years ago. So. I think it goes back quite a lot further than that as well.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the origins are, whether it was an original. I mean, sometimes you can get a little bit of crystallization on a conventional kiln.
Conventional kiln, yeah.
There may have been a little bit of that, and then once people were roasting, they were able to develop a process to do the stewing stage and then to do the crystallization.
So it's probably been refined in the 20th century, but it's been around for a lot longer than that. Yeah, because if you can keep that moisture up, and some people, some of the craft maltsters put a tarpaulin over the kiln to keep the moisture in, get the stewing process going, and get the liquefaction, and then take the tarpaulin off and cure it and make conventionally kiln crystals. Is one way of doing it. But if it all mats together, that could be quite interesting, getting it out.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Somebody's asking about colour. What is EBC? What is the meaning of EBC?
What is the meaning of EBC? Well, EBC stands for the European Brewery Convention, which is the organisation which looks after the interests of the brewing sector in Europe. But EBC also have a system of analysis. So one of the recommended methods of analysis for malt is to use EBC methodologies, which are used not only in Europe, but they're used around other parts of the world. And other systems would be what would have been called the old Institute of Brewing system. And also there's a separate system in the States, the ASBC system. So what can be slightly confusing is that within the IOB system of analysis, colours are also referred to as EBC, units of colour. So that can be a slight confusion. But if you're interested in EBC methods, look up Analytica EBC on the web, and you can download the methods. Once you've paid your fee, you can obtain the methods off of that website.
Good.
I think as well, it's quite, you can convert between the different ones. So if you get a certificate of analysis and you've got EBC on there, you can convert that into Lovibond. You can create it. It's relatively easy to convert.
Yep.
So you can find little calculators on the web and that kind of thing that will tell you that. We actually report in whichever analytical method you wish. So you just need to let us know which you would like.
Very good. Okay, one on the SMP, Hannah, from our good friend Ken Duncan. In the SMP, can you control the flow of malt up the spiral pipe? Also, what sort of diameter is the pipe?
Yeah, so we've got the pipe diameters are around 200 millimeters, but we're not completely filling them. So the grain that travels is only a very thin layer within the tubes themselves. So as it's transporting the grain, you're getting like thorough mixing as well of the grain along the tubes. And then with regards to flow rates, what we can do is we can change the speed of the offset motors. So this can change residence time within the tubes. But also we've got a screw conveyor which feeds in the material. So it sits in a hopper bin, which is on weigh cells. And then this will control the speed that the material is put into the system. So for example, as I said, with the rope, we can feed into up to 1.5 tons an hour, whereas green malts, where the material is a little bit more delicate, we're feeding it in slightly slower at a rate of about.
And does that therefore affect the depth of grain within the pipe?
Yeah, presumably so, Dr. Dave?
I would think so. Yeah.
Good stuff. Okay, and what about green malt here? Can you define green malt as a use for Cara malt production? Can it be 3 days germinated barley?
I think green malt is really as soon as the barley starts to germinate, we'd call it green malt. So you can have 1 day green malt, 2 day green malt, 3 day, 4 day green malt. Yeah.
Very good. One on crystal malts here. The slides showed crystal malts starting at 100 EBC. However, there are various malting companies selling crystal malts starting from 3 EBC. Are those only Cara malts but named as crystal malts? And so a bit of confusion around, I guess, the naming nomenclature there. Can you clear that up at all, Carl?
Not without seeing their specifications. 3 EBC sounds very low. I guess if they're calling them Cara malts or caramel malts, then they would have gone through that process of stewing. And like I explained, Cara and crystals are different in the fact that the Caras can be used in a different way. They provide a different kind of flavour and mouthfeel than when if you were just using a crystal malt or a roasted malt. And as you'll notice, and review these slides afterwards, there are quite a lot of crossovers in terms of colour. But yeah, I am aware that I've certainly, the lowest I've heard is 50, and that would be, I think, a crystal malt rather than a Cara malt. So yeah, it begins with Cara at the lower end of the scale, and then round about 50 EBC, I would guess, Dave, you'd start getting into crystals.
I mean, I think there's no convention on the naming of this type of crystalline malt, be it Cara malt or crystal malts. I think each producer would probably define it slightly differently, and a lot of these are similar products but called something different from individual companies. But I'd be surprised to see a crystal malt or even a Cara malt as low as 3 EBC. Be a challenge to make.
Question from Fergus Clark up in Perthshire. You've mentioned dehusked grains potentially going through the SMP. Can you elaborate?
Yeah, so basically this is all based on the way the system is. It's far gentler on the grain. So if you were to put a dehusked material on a drum roaster, the result probably wouldn't be very great at all. But if you popped it through the SMP where you've got really gentle transportation, gentle mixing, this is a potential for this to happen in the SMP. Yeah.
And what kind of dehusked grains would we be talking about, Hannah?
So we could do naked barley, for example. This could be put through the SMP. But if any of you have any great ideas, we do have a new product development team. So if you want to send an email, we're happy to look into any other possibilities as well. So feel free to drop the MPD email a line, and we can definitely explore any ideas that you guys have.
Very good.
I think it's quite a good opportunity because, looking at the difference, like wheat, I think you could get some really interesting flavours out of wheat if you were to apply some temperatures, crystal wheat potentially. And the other thing, I mentioned about the fact that we generally use winters because they're a bit tougher. We could look into using varieties that haven't got quite such a thick husk, maybe Maris Hotter, do a heritage range of speciality malts. So these are things we're kind of thinking about, and as Hannah says, it'd be great to get some ideas from you guys about what you'd like, and we can try it. That's the beauty of this process. We can just put a little bit through and see how it turns out.
Very good. A wee question on another one on the SMP. Is steam used at any point in the process?
No, so we don't use steam. We've got electrically heated air. So we take air from the atmosphere, and this is popped through an electrical heating system. And then this is where we pass it through the central column, and this gets introduced into the system. So as I said, it's kind of creating that really confined heat treated atmosphere. No, we don't introduce steam into the system.
Could we introduce smoke?
Good question.
We could.
That'd be really good if we could do,
but we
try
haven't.
different smokes. It'd be fascinating.
Well, it leads me onto the next question, actually, and what's the process to add smoke to peated malt? So I'll quickly cover that. We do have a smoking facility. It's up in the north of Scotland. It's in the middle of a field, so it's far away from lots of people, and that's where we have a peat burner. And that's where the peat is burned to produce the smoke, and the smoke is then ducted through green malt, and it's important that it's green malt so that the phenol, that smoky character that you get in whiskey, adheres to the and penetrates the actual grain kernel before it's dried. Because if you try to do it with dry malt, then it's quite difficult to get the flavour to hang around. So we will most likely do a distilling webinar at some point and go into some detail around that, but that's how we make peated malt, and it's available for brewers and for distillers as crushed and whole bagged malt as well. Very quick fire question: are all your grains British?
Yes.
Yes.
There we go. Good stuff. Another quick fire one: is 1% of crystal malt enough to add sweetness, or is that too low in a brewing recipe?
I think that'd be too low. I would say a minimum of 3%.
3%. Very good.
If you don't want it too dark, then just use the lowest possible crystal you can.
Good stuff. Dave, how can barley dormancy period be reduced? Ooh.
Mm-hmm. So we can reduce it by storing the grain a little bit warm. Dormancy is still pretty sort of ill-defined as to what the control mechanisms are, but we know from experience that if we store the grain warm, then it will reduce the period for the grain to come out of dormancy, but obviously balancing that against the risks of insect infestation and other potential damage to the grain.
Very good. What's the main criteria that defines the end of steeping and the beginning of germination? Is there a clear sort of?
I suppose in terms of the process, it's moving it from the steeping vessel into the germination vessel. But in terms of physiology, when the grain is already germinating through the steeping process, you'd have to ask a plant physiologist perhaps what they would define as the point at which germination starts. But it's probably reactivation of the embryo and release of plant growth regulators to stimulate.
The principal aim for us is to get up to that critical moisture. Whilst
ensuring that germination kicks off.
Yeah.
As well.
Good stuff.
Okay. I think I remember rightly, Dave, as well, that you look at the barley each harvest type of thing, and you can modify the sort of wet and dry stages of the steep to get the same result at the end.
Oh, definitely, yeah. I mean, that's an annual art and mystery, I guess, of malting. Is the maltster's task to identify the best process conditions each crop year to ensure consistency of malt quality from the previous year. So there's quite a lot of work to be done around that.
Yeah, indeed.
Good stuff. One on COAs, I suppose. How do you ensure nitrogen levels are accurate? How do you label your finished products in terms of nitrogen? So, I mean, that would appear on the COA, but what's the actual analysis there, Dave?
So on malt, we would use the Dumas principle of analysis, so burning the sample in a very pure atmosphere of oxygen, which then creates nitrogen oxides, which are then measured. So the certificate of analysis would have that value on it. Obviously, we talk a lot about nitrogen in the UK, whereas other parts of the world talk about protein. So you'd need to do, sometimes we will report protein as well. So it's a fairly simple 6.25 times the nitrogen to give you a protein value. We're pretty, so that would be our means of malt nitrogen analysis.
And I guess in terms of accuracy, we're part of a
part
group.
of ring checks and proficiency testing schemes, and we're always correct.
Good stuff. One on dextrin malts here. Can you elaborate how dextrin malts are made, or give an insight onto the science of the unfermentables that don't convert in the mash bath? So, because dextrin malts can be a bit confusing in terms of everyone sort of uses the word, but everyone has a slightly different way of making it, don't they? Hannah? Dextrin, Dave?
Dextrin, yeah. So, a lot of people's dextrin malts are essentially Cara malts.
Yeah.
So, when our dextrin malt is a little bit different insofar as it's a short germinated product, which has the same effect of leaving a lot of high molecular weight material within the grain, which will give you the head retention and the mouthfeel attributes that you'd be looking for to use it. So there are a couple of different types of dextrin malt out there. The advantage of ours, it's cheaper to make.
There we go. And it does the same thing.
And it does exactly the same thing, if not better. Yes.
Yeah, good stuff. Here's one on heritage. So we could give a very quick answer. But what are the stages in resurrecting heritage malt for commercial brewing purposes? I mean, that could take hours.
It's another webinar.
Well, it is another webinar. We can advertise it. So we're going to look out for, this is from Jason, look out for a specific webinar on heritage malts that we're going to be doing in June, hosted by Dr. Dave. And we're going to be looking at all the development of our heritage range, how we went about it, and how we select, and how we select new things in the future as well. So as if
you can hold off till then, we'll do a full session on it.
Very good. The information about that will be coming out in the newsletter and online in a few weeks' time. Are there any specific malts that work well with heavily dry hopped beers, and what parameters in the COA classifies them to be suitable for this purpose? Wow, that was a mouthful. How do we answer that one, Carl?
I think I can't think of anything specifically in the COA that would make it suitable that would tell you it's suitable for going up against, big bold hop flavors. I guess it's just about tasting the malt. So I mentioned Clear Choice. Clear Choice hasn't got so much malty backbone. It's not got the astringent compounds, which we can perceive as bitter. So that really allows you to sort of get those hops in there. The hop aromas and flavors aren't going to fight with that malty backbone. So that tends to work quite well as a variety. And extra pales tend to be a little sweeter too, because they've not been cured for quite so long in the kilning stage. So I would say those two things. But the best thing to do is have a taste or make a malt tea. And then you can have it play around with that. You can make a malt tea and a hop tea and taste them together. And that's how you can start exploring where you can push boundaries and get big, bold hop flavors with the right balance of sweetness and body to give a really satisfying beer that people want to drink.
Now, one on mashing. So Ken, I would say have a look at our previous episode on mashing, but I'll put it to Carl anyway. It's a question about step mashing versus decoction mashing. We don't generally do decoction mashing in the UK. Is it to do with tradition or is it to do with modification? I would say those things go hand in hand in a way, don't they?
Yeah, I would say it's both. So going back in time when you didn't have steam jackets and accurate temperature control, the best way to deal with an under-modified European barley would be to take a portion out, heat that up, in fact boil it, albeit you do take it through a stage of saccharification and then you put it back in to get the temperature rise. So it's just that the malting process, the mashing process in the step mash is just more controlled. It's a more modern way of doing it. But decoction mashing was one way around it at the time. and probably not quite as accurate. And I imagine it's a nightmare to kind of calculate it too. I'd never want to try. So.
1-on-6 row here from Sherwin. Dave, you relayed that 6-row barley for that you can use 6-row barley for specialty malts for its hardness, but could it be attributed to the higher protein being better for colour development?
Yeah, quite possibly. Yeah. I mean, it's going to generate more opportunity for colour development. Yeah, it's not a bad idea.
I guess, too.
Yeah.
I've just asked Steve to join us because I've got a couple of questions that's kind of round about impact of what's going on just now in the world, really, on storage, processing of the 2020 harvest, and just a general kind of question about how we're finding it. Steve, are you able to speak very briefly about that?
I should think so.
Welcome, Steve.
You don't want to see me as well, do you?
You can if you want to join us. We can all squeeze onto the screen.
Can we?
There we go.
Is it working? There we are. Look at that. Welcome to my daughter's bedroom, everybody.
So the questions about from Fergus, what impact might this the drawdown in production have on 2020 storage and processing of the harvest?
That's a bit of an ongoing issue at the moment. We are all the crops are now in the ground. We've had a bit of a double whammy this year in terms of last autumn was quite wet, so not all the land got planted with especially winter wheat that people wanted. So there's more barley gone in the ground, and now maltsters are using less than they would want to, because obviously the malt demand has gone down. So yes, there is potentially going to be storage issues come harvest. A lot of the barley is being moved into feed, so it is being downgraded and moved away. I mean, that's essentially what we'll have to do with this crop. Is the crop that's needed will be bought from the new crop, and the rest will have to move its way to other markets or stay in somebody's store somewhere. It's just something that's going to have to be worked through, and there's obviously an impact. There's a hit on that because feed barley isn't worth what malting barley is. So it's an ongoing dilemma that we've all got as to how we're going to deal with it all.
Will the farmers at this point with the springs have the option to do more around fertilizing and that kind of thing? Could they treat it differently? Knowing that it's not going to be sold as a malting grade?
If they don't want it to go for malting grade, then they could put a lot more fertilizer on and try and push it on and get a higher yield out of it. So, except that they're going to get less money per ton, but then grow more tons. So yes, that's one way out of it.
Good. I guess we're going to get the pick of the crop. That's the one good thing, you know. We'll have quality to select what we like. So
there's a lot of other dynamics going on in there about the sort of land that, you know, if it's traditional wheat land, it's got malting barley on it, it's unlikely to make malting grade. We've still got a few months to go till harvest, and it might be sunny at the moment, but it's going to be pretty cold come the end of the weekend. We could have another dry spell, we could have another wet spell. We don't know what's going to come out of this harvest yet. So it's a long way to go, but that's what we're looking at the moment.
And we're monitoring this, on a pretty much a daily basis with our farmers and with our merchants, and so we watch these things very carefully for sure. There was a spring crop update put on the website a couple of weeks ago, and there'll be more of those updates coming on a kind of regular basis as we progress through the harvest. So watch out for those on chrismalt.com. Fergus has got a follow up. Does that mean an overall higher quality of malted barley for next year, as there'll be lower than would have been if it was going for feed?
Is there going to be better quality? Well, yeah. Effectively, if you've got a bigger pot, then statistically you're likely to have more of the grade that you're looking for available to you. So. Yes, all being well, we would have good quality barley, but we don't know what good quality barley actually is until we start using it. It might look good, but it doesn't necessarily all perform all perform
Yeah.
right, and it might not be in the right place.
We're dealing with
But-
biology ultimately, so it's
Absolutely, yes.
not the easiest one.
Yes.
Okay, one last question in the box here. We've got through 25 so far. It's an impressive tally, everyone. So how and it's not about malting or brewing. It's simply how have you found how brewers are getting on in these hard times? So it's it's a nice one to finish on in a way.
Sorry, say that again, Colin. You
how have
most of that?
we found how are our brewers getting on? Are people having a hard time? And I would say that they are.
Yes.
And we're doing everything we can to support. We've done quite a few initiatives so far that obviously these webinars are part of what we're doing to try and encourage people and educate people while they've got some downtime, and we hope that everyone's finding them useful. We've been doing things like reducing our minimum order quantities in the UK. This week we've launched a buyback scheme as well. If people do have full pallets of malt that they can't see themselves using in the short term, direct UK customers, then they can send it back to us. So we're doing what we can to support everyone at this tough time, and hope that eventually the pubs reopen.
I would say, looking at the statistics, and I've been kind of looking online to see what people are drinking, and I think people are drinking quite a bit. They're at home and they're kind of drinking this, drowning the sorrow, I guess you could say. So some of the customers I've got, I've been having a ring round, having a chat with them, making sure they're okay, and they've kind of done things slightly differently. If they've got a cold store full of cask beer, for example, then they've been decanting that into bagging boxes or into mini kegs, and they've been selling that, direct, and then dropping it off on people's doorsteps. So they built themselves a little web shop, and they're doing that. The guys who are fortunate enough to have small pack lines, canning facilities, bottling facilities, they're doing okay, again, through web shops and that kind of thing. And people like Cara, the Campaign for Real Ale, and a couple of other organisations have launched websites and apps where you can buy people's beer, and the brewers need to subscribe to that. So it's not all doom and gloom, and I think where brewers are managing to sell direct to the public, they're making the margin that they wouldn't be doing if they were selling it through a pub, because the landlord makes the margin. So they're doing okay, but it's not easy times.
I think the great thing about this industry is that everyone does pull together, and we do what we can to support each other. So keep in touch, keep watching the webinars, and keep if you need any help from us or anything, then give us a shout. Any technical questions or anything else, be in touch.
Yeah,
I think we'll finish it there, team. Thanks for everyone's contributions. Thank you to Hannah and Carl for your presentation. That was great.
Thank you very much.
For those who've been dipping in and out, it will be available online on YouTube, and the slides will also be available on the website in the next few days. And our next one is going to be on East Coast IPAs. So look out for the announcement on that, and we're going to be looking at all the ins and outs of brewing the best possible East Coast IPA, the relatively new style that's very much taken the craft brewing world by storm. Thank you very much, everyone, and we'll speak again soon.